it's cool. That's fine. So we have great discussions about this. Obviously, we come at it from a different lens. So I know it's possible to do that.
Yeah.
But for some reason, so many people are unwilling to do that, and I think it kind of defeats the purpose of like what someone like Jesus is supposed to stand for, which is like one of the things I would say is like listening to other people and understanding where they come from.
Jesus did have debates of a kind. It's kind of interesting watching his sort of confrontations with the Pharisees and the like. But the thing that does get lost is how interesting it all is.
Yeah.
So like on Wes's Rogan episode, he talks briefly about some of the like Gnostic Gospels and why they're not part of the canon, and talks about the motivation for not including them, and says that they seem to be like theologically motivated. I would love to talk to him about his idea about the theological motivations of the Gnostic Gospels versus the canonical Gospels. If that were a debate, I mean, in my video, he says like, well, part of the problem as to why these Gnostic Gospels aren't included is because I might be misquoting him here, but he says something like because they seem to have like theological motivations. They seem to have been written with like an apologetical purpose. And I'm like, well, so do the canonical Gospels. People think that about the canonical Gospels as well. And a lot of people were like, well, you cut out the reason that he gave because he was specifically talking about, their uncomfortability with like the tomb story or whatever. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but like I've got interesting things to say on that, but I don't want to do it on the format of like, well, Wes says this, but I say to you, I want it to be like, well, hey man, what do you think about this? There's some really interesting like apologetical motives within the Gospels, even on the tomb itself. So like Wes is talking about how one of these apocryphal texts has people like camped outside the tomb because like it's really important to them to show that like the tomb was being watched, that the body couldn't have been stolen or something. Like it was really, and this is part of the motivation. Yeah, I might be sort of misquoting or paraphrasing or whatever that, but there's some interesting stuff about the tomb in the New Testament. Like this is so interesting. One of the most important apologetical arguments for the resurrection of Jesus is the fact that the tomb was found empty. Right, Jesus is laid in a tomb by Joseph of Arimathea, and then there's an empty tomb. The disciples go to the tomb and it's empty. Now, this is, again, we're having a conversation, so this works. This isn't like some definitive proof of anything, but it's interesting that if you look at how the tomb is described in the Gospels, in Mark's Gospel, it's a tomb. In Matthew's Gospel, which is the next latest, it's a new tomb. Why is it a new tomb? Oh, because one of the most important observations of the Gospels is that the tomb was empty. But you could bury multiple bodies in a tomb. And so how do you know that Jesus had actually gone? What if he got mistaken for a different body? What if he got lost? What if there were loads of it? The important thing is that the tomb was empty, so we know that there was a body in there that's not there anymore. So Matthew's Gospel says it's a new tomb, because if it's new, no one else had been laid in it before. By the time you get to Luke's Gospel, it's described as a tomb in which no one had been laid. It's specified that no one had been laid in the tomb. And John's Gospel goes to the double whammy. It says, laid in a new tomb in which no one had been laid. So there's this like subtle indication, like is there like this increasing emphasis on the emptiness of the tomb? And so they really wanted to, and maybe the tomb actually was a new tomb in which no one had been laid, but they just felt like it was more important to emphasize that. Or maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe it just happens to be the way that they're describing the tomb. But there's stuff like that, which if you read through the Gospels, there is absolutely no way you would notice that. There's no way you would notice that unless you have a specific question in mind. You go back to the Gospels and you read through them with that question in mind, which is what biblical scholars do, which is why even now, after thousands of years, people are still discovering things about the Gospels. Like something like that. You can imagine thousands of years, no one's noticed that sort of developmental description of the tomb. And then finally someone's like, this is kind of interesting. That kind of stuff is still happening because the Gospels are so dense and there's so much in them. And there's so many things that seem completely irrelevant unless you're asking the right kind of question. And that's one of them. So I'd love to know what Wes thinks about that, for example, and whether that at all influences his idea about motivations of the Gospels. That's a lot weaker than the obvious motivation in the Gnostic literature that he's talking about. But it's an interesting consideration. And I would love to know what he thinks, for example. And if that were a debate, that point that I've just made is nowhere near strong enough to make like an argument out of. To say, well, hold on a second, Wes, because here's some evidence of motivate. So I wouldn't use it. So it wouldn't get discussed. And people wouldn't know about it. But in a conversation, It's like, oh, hey, that reminds me of this, and let's talk about it. So it's so much more
Yes.
interesting for everyone as well, you know?
That's why I like that idea rather than the more
Yeah.
formal format, because people there's people who aren't going to be moved or swayed by anything based on, it doesn't matter if you tell them that wall is white there, here's the scientific reason why, they're still they're saying it's fucking black. But then there's a lot of people out there who they just want to hear different ideas, and not one thing has to be 100% right or 100% wrong, and they want to try to get to the truth. It's like, I always talk about how I think one of the worst, I don't know, like curses that we've cast upon ourselves in humanity is making science and religion diametrically opposed to each other. They both seek the same answer. Why not work together?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's not what wins the clicks. But there are a lot of people who might think that way.
These days, I think maybe the trend is reversing. Like
I hope so.
If you hosted a debate that was like science versus religion, I don't think anyone clicks on it, because it's like kind of a dead horse. Like, it was really popular during the whole height of new atheism and stuff like that, but people kind of lost interest. It's boring. Now people are more interested. Like, the stuff about Jesus claiming to be God, for example. I just did this debate on whether Jesus claimed to be God in the Gospels.
Who'd you debate?
David Wood, who's a Christian YouTuber. And like, I think it's a pretty popular topic, which is surprising, because it's like a point of like scriptural exegesis. It's kind of, but that kind of stuff is more interesting to people now, because Christianity is experiencing a sort of popular revival in the online space. It's becoming cool again, and people are getting really into the weeds with it. So now this kind of new atheist, like science versus religion, problem of evil, it's kind of boring. People don't really care about it. They want like the biblical stuff, which is really interesting. And so now,
why do you think that happened?
Because it's just been done. Like, we've had the debates and the discussions, and like,
no, why do you think because I completely agree with you, there's been a phenomenon online that has spread to the real world where Christianity has become like very cool, which that's fine. I'm just curious why you think that's happened.
I'm not a sociologist, but there are some hypotheses. One is that Christianity is right all along, and people are beginning to realize it again. That's one explanation. Another explanation is to remember. You like that one, don't you?
Your mic wasn't on, but Alessi clicked.
Another explanation is that
he's such a good sport. I love this.
Like, you could think that, like, look, new atheism was cool. It was really cool, and it was a phenomenon. If you were alive, like in 2008, 2009, I mean, I was alive, but I was like 9 years old, but you know what I mean? Like, you would have seen the intellectual space become dominated by atheism. And it's happened throughout history. It happens in the Victorian era, kind of coinciding with Charles Darwin, and suddenly the intellectual elite, they're all atheists all of a sudden. And then you've got like religious revivals happening, and you get the growth of Mormonism out of revivals in America, and sort of goes back and forth, and like new atheism crops up, and it's really cool, and everyone's talking about it, and it's cool to be an atheist. And when you imagine a Christian, you imagine like your school teacher, sort of happy-go-lucky, and you've got the cool atheist in a leather jacket, like, well, actually, miss, you don't know about this, right? And okay, that's cool. But now, because people have gotten used to that and they begin to see through it, now when you think of an atheist, you think of the Reddit user with the fedora, and the Christian is the sort of like based Giga Chad. Like, you know what I mean? And so it's like a cultural shift. And and so why was new atheism so popular? Well, maybe because it was cottoning onto something, or maybe it was just a publishing fad. And we've got kind of a YouTube publishing fad right now, Christianity. But that's one hypothesis. Maybe it is actually just experiencing a growth, because it always seems to come back. But I think things just ebb and flow. I think you're right. Christianity is sort of coming up, and then suppose like Joe Rogan converts to Christianity, that'd be huge, become a big thing, and then 5 years down the line,
it won't be cool.
And Rogan's talking about Christianity again, and it's like the same stuff, and all of these arguments people right now find really interesting. Like, gosh, why did the disciples die for their beliefs, and all of this kind of, oh, that's so interesting. All of that is just like is water under the bridge, and suddenly the guy who comes in and goes, well, actually, I think that might be a mistranslation of the Greek. It's like, oh, hello, this is fun, And so new atheism before was all about the problem of evil and religion being evil. I don't think like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens know like a word of Greek. I mean, I don't know. But like all of these criticisms that we've been talking about, all of this interesting stuff. Well, did Jesus claim to be God? What about this translation? That stuff just kind of doesn't come up. There was a little bit about the virgin birth, actually, that Richard Dawkins likes to talk about. That's kind of interesting. But outside of that, like, no, it's like a different approach. And so if atheism becomes cool again, it's not going to be that new atheism style. It's going to be something else.
It'll be a new version.
It's going to be scholarly. Because I think what people are
right.
interested in now is like the scholarly stuff, which for me is really exciting. I'm amazed that I've essentially become mostly interested in biblical scholarship. I used to be like a philosopher, essentially, or like a wannabe philosopher, analytic philosophy,
An Oxford
an
philosopher.
Oxford philosopher. Arguments, logical positivist, sort of arguments of the existence of God, premises, conclusions, syllogisms, all that kind of stuff. And I used to think that the rest was basically all like bunk. And now I just don't care about your stupid premises, man. I want to read the Bible. That's what I'm interested in. And it's amazing that that's happened. But I think that that's happening across the board, and people are interested in the text. And I'm constantly discovering things, especially in this debate about whether Jesus is claimed to be God or not. There are all like Christians often look at me like I've said that a square has three sides when I say Jesus didn't claim to be God, because it's like this obvious fact of the Gospels. In biblical scholarship for the past few hundred years, it's been mainstream just to say that Jesus didn't actually historically claim to be God. And that's like a later development into the doctrine.
Oh, they admit that.
Well, admit that is a strong term. Like, there are scholars who think that's the case. There are some scholars who think that's not the case. And a lot of biblical scholars are non-religious. So I think Morris Casey, for example, isn't a Christian, or wasn't a Christian when he wrote his, I forget what it's called. It's called like Jewish Prophet to Gentile God, I think, which is kind of a proto version of the most popular biblical scholar at the moment. It's probably Bart Ehrman, who you should have him on the show. I mean, he's fantastic.
Yeah,
Like,
his name's come up.
he is phenomenal, man. He's great. But like, a lot of Christians look at him and say, yeah, he's kind of cool, but he's actually not that great, because I think he's made some blunders in the past and stuff like this as well. Like, I remember when I was talking about this West Huff thing, my friends were pointing me to something that I wish I could remember it for fairness' sake, but something that like Bart had written that had a similar level of like just getting something wrong. I think it was about the telephone game, actually. But anyway, like, yeah, so those are your sort of scholars who are like, Jesus never claimed to be God. Bart Ehrman's book is How Jesus Became God, and it's about that kind of stuff. It's quite accessible. But Brant Pitre just wrote a book called Jesus and Divine Christology, which attempts to regain the idea that Jesus did make divine claims. But he opens the text, this is like last year, he opens the text by saying that most scholars think Jesus didn't claim to be God. And he describes this paradox. Most scholars think that Jesus didn't claim to be God, but most scholars think that very early on in Christianity, people started believing that he was God. So how do you explain this paradox? If he didn't claim to be God, why did they so immediately think he was God? And Brant Pitre's answer is to say, well, because he did actually claim to be God, and he gives all of his arguments why. And it's interesting, but I don't think Jesus claimed to be God. I think
You don't.
no, there are all kinds of arguments. That's why I say that Christians will look at me like I've lost my mind, but I think it's important to understand that in biblical scholarship, this is a very mainstream opinion. That's not an appeal to authority. I'm not saying it's therefore correct. I'm just saying it's not some like batshit, like wacky view. It's incredibly common. I think it might even be the most common view of scholars of Christology, but I don't know. So don't quote me on that. Don't even paraphrase me on that. But I find it absolutely fascinating. And Christians have their lines. They say, we've already discussed one. Jesus forgives sins in Mark chapter 2, and only God can forgive sins. But I've already given an explanation as to why I don't think that's him claiming to be God. And people say this just forgetting that in John chapter 20, Jesus gives the ability to forgive sins, the authority to forgive sins to his disciples. It's as if they just forget, or they say, oh, well, that's because, they could only forgive sins, through Jesus. It's like, yeah, but what did Jesus say? As the Father has sent me, now I'm sending you. So if they're only doing it because Jesus gave him that authority, then Jesus is only doing it because God gave him that authority. It's like the same thing, right? Or they'll talk about how Jesus walked on the water. If Jesus walks on the water, you must have heard of that story.
Of course, yeah.
And he walks on the water, and in Job chapter 9, it's written that Job is speaking in it, and it's written that God alone treads upon the waves of the sea. Only God treads on the waves of the sea. And so people say, so that means
Jesus is God.
Jesus is, and it's calling back to this imagery. And again, they just kind of forget that Simon Peter then gets out of the boat and walks on water as well. And he starts sinking because he doesn't have enough faith. And Jesus sort of says, like, oh, you haven't got enough faith. That's why you're sinking. But the implication is that if Simon Peter had enough faith, he would have stayed
He'd be
afloat.
able to do it.
And so how did he stay? Oh, well, okay, but he could only walk on water because, he had like faith in Jesus. Okay, but then maybe Jesus could only walk on water because he had faith in God. In other words, the stuff I was talking about with John the Baptist, all of the indications that Jesus gives of things that only God should be able to do, that he can do, forgiving sins, glorifying himself, raising the dead, judging people, all of this kind of stuff, are all things which at some point or another he then gives to his disciples as well. As if to say that, yes, I have this authority that's come from God, but it's something that's been administered to me. And in John chapter 17, Jesus prays for his disciples and all Christian believers, and prays that they'll all be one together. Can you pull up John 17? This is one of the most instructive parts of the New Testament. Also, actually, if you just want an interesting tidbit of mistranslation before we go there, can you type in John 12:44? Actually, just in a new tab, because I want to go to a slightly different website. John 12:44, I think, is the verse. Yeah, check this out. So scroll down, go to Bible Hub. Scroll down. That one, Bible Hub. So this is John 12:44, right? So in the NIV, which is the most popular translation at the top there, then Jesus cried out, "Whoever believes in me does not believe in me only, but in the one who sent me." So he's saying, like, he's basically saying that I've come from the Father. Like, if you believe in me, you don't just believe in me, you believe in the Father too. Right. So he's sort of claiming to be God here, right? However, look underneath. Look at all of the other translations.
Jesus shouted to the crowds, "If you trust me, you are trusting not only me, but also God who sent me."
Take a look at the English Standard Version.
And Jesus cried out and said, "Whoever believes in me believes not in me, but in him who sent me."
Do you notice a difference?
He's separating the two.
Do you notice a difference between the ESV there and the NIV? It's the word only.
Yeah.
So in one of them it says, "Whoever believes in me does not believe in me only, but in the one who sent me." In others it just says, "Whoever believes in me does not believe in me, but believes in the one who sent me." Now here's a question for you. But all of these have been translated from the same Greek manuscripts. Which one do you think the Greek aligns with? Do you think the word only is in the Greek? The answer is no, it's not. So how did it end up in the English? Because of translation philosophies. There are literalist translations.
Translation philosophies.
Yeah, because there are different ways to translate a phrase. Are you trying to translate the words, like word for word, or are you trying to translate the phrase? So for example, in the Old Testament, there's a verse about slavery where God says, it says of slaves, he says, they are their silver, I think he says. Like, that slave is your silver. Now, what that means is that the slave is your money, because silver is like a euphemism for money. Now, as a translator into English, you've got to look at the Hebrew and decide, are you going to translate it word for word and say the slave is his silver? Or are you going to translate the idea for an English reader and say the slave is his property?
Yeah.
So depending on what you're going for, it's going to do a different thing. So the NIV, the most popular translation of the Bible, is a so-called like phrase-for-phrase translation. So it tries to get at what the Bible means. Whereas if you read something like the NRSV, which is my favorite version, the New Revised Standard Edition, the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition, so NRSV UE, this is an attempt to accurately translate the Greek terms, which I find most helpful because that's what I'm interested in. But if you're just trying to read for the stories, you might prefer the NIV. But you've got to realize when you're reading an English translation that you are reading through the lens of an interpreter.
Yes.
So in this instance, this is the most obvious case. Bear in mind that I'm debating whether Jesus claimed to be God. If you read the ESV there, and imagine I'm up and I'm at the podium and I'm doing my debate, and I say Jesus didn't claim to be God because look, he said, "Whoever believes in me does not believe in me, but believes in the one who sent me." So he's separating himself from God. But now imagine my opponent gets up. He's saying Jesus did claim to be God, and he just quotes the other translations of Jesus claimed to be God because he says, "Whoever believes in me doesn't just believe in me, but believes in the one who sent me." So I must have this connection. So that translation, that one word, is crucial to understanding the nature of Jesus and what he is claiming to be. And that is an interesting example of how I think they've taken too much. But you can understand the NIV translators, they've already assumed that Jesus did claim to be God. So when they come across the Greek, they're like, well, what did Jesus mean here? What idea was he trying to get across, and how can we convey that to an English reader? And when he said that they don't believe in me, but the one who sent me, what he means is like, they don't just believe in me. So they translated it that way. But if you've got a different interpretation, that's not how it reads. So if you are ever reading the Bible, and either something jumps out at you, you think it's important or interesting, or definitely if it's confusing, the first thing that you should always do, look on Bible Hub, scroll up to the top here. See where it says Greek? Up a bit?
Yep, right here.
Yeah, that should... No, up a bit. Sorry, yeah, just click on that. Anytime what you have is a breakdown of the original Greek text next to the words that's been translated. So if you scroll down a tiny little bit, whoever believing... the one believing in me not believes in me, but in the one who sent me. So you can investigate it for yourself.
And there's brackets there too.
Yeah, so the brackets are kind of because... you know, it's not like a perfect translation into English. Like there are like Greek uses the definitive article, so it says the equivalent of like the God a lot of the time, which that itself becomes really interesting when
Of
you look at John
course.
chapter 1. Like there's so like when John in John chapter 1 it says in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And later it says the Word became flesh. So the Word is Jesus. It says the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In fact, yeah, let's just do it. Can you pull it up? Can you go to John 1? Type in John 1 Greek. And then, yeah, click that Interlinear Bible. That'll do. Okay, so check this out. So you can see the orange text there. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Right? Notice that where it says, and the Word was with God,
Yep.
it says with ton theon, which in Greek sort of crucially is something like, so there's a dash there because the word that we don't do that in English. We don't say it was the God. But in Greek, you have this definitive, you have this ton, which kind of crudely in English would mean something like the God. But notice how it says the Word was with ton theon, the God, and then it says, and the Word was ho logos. Sorry, and God was the Word. So you've got ho logos, the Word. You've got ton theon, the God. But it says the Word was with ton theon, but the logos was with theos. There's no ton. There's no definitive article. So in other words, it basically reads as the Word was with the God, and the Word was God. So some people look at this and say that, yeah, so the difference between God and the God in this instance is the difference between something like God as like a being and like God as like meaning just like divinity, or the same thing as God. So Jehovah's Witnesses are huge on this, for example, you know. So they translate this, I think, in their Bible as the Word was with God and the Word was a God, or something like that, you know. And so some people look at this and say, well, we should translate this as in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was divine, or something that means something similar, right? If you look at the Greek, at the very least, it's interesting that in one of these instances, it's ton theon. In the other instance, in the next usage, it's not. It's just theos. There's no definitive article. And does that make a difference? Well, who knows? I don't know. But that's not even a question you can ask if you're just reading an English translation and you trust it all the way. Anyway, we were just about to look at John 17. Stop me if we're going too long, by the way.
No, you're good. This is great.
17.
John 17. So this is you can click off that. This is the most interesting chapter for me. So he's if you scroll down a bit, a little bit more. So he's praying for his disciples. There we go. Praying for all his believers. So he's just prayed for his disciples. And then he says, my prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who believe in me through their message. That is all Christian believers. That all of them may be one, Father. Just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so the world may believe that you've sent me. I've given them the glory you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I in them, you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. So he's talking about the disciples and all Christian believers all being in me as I'm in you, and we'll all be one, and we're all going to be together. This is like, whoa. What do you mean? Like Jesus and the Father have a distinct, unique relationship. What do you mean that I've given them the glory that you've given me? What do you mean that they're all going to be one with me in the way that I'm one with you? What on earth are you talking about? So
what
I'm
do you
reading
think?
this, and I'm seeing Jesus here. If Jesus, so Christians will look at the way that Jesus is like amplified and glorified and say he's claiming to be God. I'm like, if that's what he's doing, then he's making the disciples gods as well. So for example, in John's Gospel, Jesus says things like, I and the Father are one. In John chapter 10, verse 30, he says, I and the Father are one. And the Jewish opponents pick up stones to stone him to death because they say, you're claiming to be God. And he says to them, haven't you read your scripture? There are other people in the Old Testament who are called gods. Why can't I do the same thing? Why are you accusing me of blasphemy for claiming to be the Son of God? So he clarifies that he's not claiming to be God in the way that they think. And then, another important part of the Gospels is when Philip, the disciple Philip, asks Jesus to see the Father. And Jesus says to him, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. And again, Christians point to this and say, see, he's claiming to be God. Anyone who's seen me has seen the Father. But when he explains what he means, he then says, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. So when Philip says, when do I get to see the Father? He says, Philip, how long have you been with me? and you don't know that if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, because the Father is in me and I'm in the Father. So when he's asked about his relationship to the Father, he says, well, the Father's in me and I'm in the Father. Then you jump to John 17, where he's saying, well, I pray that one day all of the disciples will be in me, just as I'm in you, and we'll all be in each other all together. So all of these,
we can be equal.
Yeah, so all of these indications of like Jesus apparently claiming to be God in a unique
Right.
sense seems to be things that he's saying that the disciples and maybe all
Are
Christian
gonna be
believers can do too.
capable of.
I don't believe that the 12 apostles, let alone the rest of Christendom, can become Yahweh. So I've got to reinterpret this. I've got to say, like, when Jesus says, I'm in the Father and the Father's in me, if that's something that's also accessible to the disciples, it can't be Jesus claiming to be identical with Yahweh. It must mean something else. So a lot of these arguments I reject for those reasons. So when you ask me about what I think Jesus is doing, I think he's providing some kind of idyllic example. A really interesting examination or explication of that comes from him walking on the water. As I say, he walks on the water. Peter then walks on the water as well, but he starts sinking because he doesn't have enough faith. So Jesus is the idyllic, faithful. Jesus is the idyllic, faithful person.
Right.
It's like if you have the right amount of faith, you will be able to walk on water. And because Peter can do it for a bit, it implies that that is the kind of power that he could have had if he had enough faith. At the very least, it's an indication that you don't have to just be Yahweh incarnate to be able to be given the power to walk on water. You can be given it by God without having to be God himself. And I think that theme is consistently throughout the Gospels.
What really sucks about this stuff is like you want to know the truth.
Mm-hmm.
You want to know where it all comes from. You want to know why the universe is here,
Yeah.
who controls it, where God is, if he exists, what he's like, which of the religious books gets it right, which gets it wrong, if there's a mix of whatever. But sadly, everything is set up where it's a layer that leads to a layer of 10 things that leads to a layer, but it's exponential.
But I love it for that reason.
No, it makes it fun.
Yeah.
But the complexity makes it also, it may be fun, but it's also exhausting because the average person is like, man, I got to work my fucking, I got to pay the bills. You know what I mean? I don't have time to fucking look through Codex Sinaiticus or whatever the fuck it's called. You know what I mean? And yet, you know, you can run, you've already done it, like melted my brain today, where you can run in circles with some of these phrases that, by the way, are just one translation of the fucking 45 translations that also have all different meanings. And then we're trying to decide which one is which. And it's like, at the end of the day, I see why the church has been able to just sell this. Like, listen, there was a guy named Jesus, said he was God, he came down, died for your sins. Now take this fucking communion and live a good life. Like, it's simple. Yeah. People are like, that's a simple story. Sounds cool. I want to do that. And I get that.
And by the way, like, that might be correct. Like, because all of this goes on, and bear in mind, like, you know, when these documents first emerge and people are like, this is the stuff that people are doing. They're like, oh my goodness, there's so much here. What the hell are we going to do? So they all get together and decide on their doctrines. They're like, we're going to get together and we're going to work it out. So they go through all of this kind of stuff. And they're like, this is what we think. Are we all agreed? Cool, set. And then no one has to worry about it. Because this debate has already taken place. It's already been done. And that's that. And what like Catholics in particular will say is like, these debates happen. The issue is settled. And we have to accept that the Holy Spirit has guided them to make the right decisions, and we have our doctrines, and that's what we believe. The problem is that that does offer you the ability to not have to worry and look into it yourself, but then if you start reading it yourself and you're like, actually, I'm not actually so sure they got it right, then cool, you've regained your spiritual freedom and whatnot, but you've now got this massive problem to deal with, which is you've got to go back through absolutely everything and see what you find. So that's why I'm glad I came at this not as like a Christian who started questioning, going, oh, but what about this? Oh, but if that's that, then what about this? Because then it's sort of like stressful and you're all over the place. For me, I'm looking from the outside, and I'm like, John the Baptist is interesting. I'm just going to look up him. And as a Christian, you might be like, oh, but that means that I'm going to have to think about this and that. For me, I'm like, I don't have to worry about that at all. I'm just like, who's this guy? What's interesting about him? Yeah. And you can just look at what's interesting. And the funny thing is, right, we opened this conversation talking about the Gnostic Gospels, and we opened up like a tab about the Gospel of Judas because I was going to get into explaining all this stuff in the Gnostic Gospels because I find it really interesting, and we didn't even do it because we got so caught up in the Bible. But like, I just find it quite funny that I've just realized that we didn't even talk about it because all of this
you
stuff,
can go for it now if you want.
All of this stuff is in the canonical tradition, and then you've got this Gnostic tradition which has this wacky other, like this completely different kind. In fact, one of the most important Gnostic groups, they're called the Mandaeans, who still exist. These are guys who believe that John the Baptist is the most important and final prophet. They believe Jesus was a false prophet, and that the reason John the Baptist didn't want to baptize him isn't because he was unworthy, but because he knew he was going to be trouble. It's like it's mental. It's so cool to think. I mean, these Mandaeans, they claim to be the descendants of the original followers of John the Baptist, but anthropologically we know that's probably not the case. Type in Mandaeans. There you go.
Oh, I thought you spelled that right for a minute or less. I was going to give you credit. But I see it was a different Google.
There's John the Baptist. He's great. And so you see where it says John the Baptist and the Essenes underneath. The Essenes are a religious group that a lot of people think John the Baptist belonged to. And by extension, some people think that Jesus belonged to this too, and it explains many of the. If you type in Essenes and pull up the Wikipedia, it's quite widely accepted that John the Baptist was an Essene. But I know that James McGrath, who wrote the John the Baptist stuff I was talking about earlier, I think he disputes this. Essenes, there you go. So a Jewish sect that flourished between the 2nd century BCE to the 1st century CE, so the right time
So
period.
they're part of the Jewish religion.
Yeah, as Jesus himself was, and John the Baptist would have been.
So you have Orthodox Jews, you have secular Jews, and you have Essene Jews.
It's not quite delineated like that.
I'm fucking with you.
Okay. Okay, that's good. But yeah, you can see, for example, they've got an emphasis on ritual purity. So the Mandaeans who exist today as followers of John the Baptist, they see baptism as a continual thing. They're constantly washing themselves. In Christianity, it became something you do once and then you're done with it and you're in the faith. For them, it's like a ritual thing. They're constantly washing themselves. And so the Essenes emphasis on ritual purity, asceticism. You know what asceticism is? So like
I've heard of that,
throwing off
actually.
like earthly goods and like sort of living in essentially like chosen poverty. And you see how John the Baptist is described as living in the wilderness, eating locusts and honey, wearing like, camel skin. So he seems to be an ascetic as well. And their community at Qumran, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, which is kind of interesting as well. So yeah, some people think if you type in "was John the Baptist an Essene," it'll probably give you like an AI overview of the kind of stuff I'm talking about. But the thing is, it's kind of interesting, and so yeah. So it says, while the parallels between John the Baptist and the Essenes are striking, there's no definitive evidence to prove that John was an Essene, though some have suggested it. So yeah, as I say, it's debated, but it's a popular scholarly view that he was an Essene. But the thing is, we just don't know very much about these people. But we know that the Mandaeans. Can you type in? Can you just type in like Mandaean Book of John or something like that? I forget what they actually call it. Book of John, I think, and try and find like an online version. Yeah, go down to notice.org. Go back down there.
This one?
Yeah. And then Control F or Command F for Jesus. So this is the Mandaeans' actual literature. Okay, so now go down. Sorry, go down instead of up.
This one?
Yeah, click down and then click it again. Okay, check this out. So this is the Mandaeans' literature, which we're not supposed to be able to read, by the way, because they don't want other people reading it. But this is what they're telling them, and they do it. It's sort of in the form of a poem. Who told Jesus? Who told Jesus Christ, Mary's son? Who told Jesus so he came to the Jordan's banks and told him, John, perform your baptism over me and pronounce over me the name you pronounce. If I become your disciple, then I shall mention you in my epistle. If I do not become your disciple, then erase my name from your scroll. So Jesus goes to John the Baptist and says, if you baptize me, if I become your disciple, I'll mention you in my epistle. I'll write about you. But if you don't, erase me. And then they have this debate. John spoke to Jesus, saying to Jesus Christ in Jerusalem, you have lied to Jews. You have deceived men, the priests. You've cut off the seed from men and labor and pregnancy from women. You loosened the Sabbath that Moses ordained in Jerusalem. All of this kind of stuff. And they're having like a debate and a discussion. Jesus Christ saying to John in Jerusalem, if I have lied to Jews, then may a burning fire consume. This is like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
And this is their belief as to what happened at the baptism of Jesus. John is like, no, man, you're a deceiver. You're a liar. You're a false prophet.
It's totally different.
And Jesus is like, come on. And then I think eventually God like tells John, like, go on, just baptize him. And then Jesus becomes this false prophet. There's something interesting about the fact that John the Baptist accuses him of loosening the Sabbath. And I can't remember what it is exactly, but James McGrath lent me this view where basically there's something about it which means it probably wasn't like made up by the Mandaeans, because I think the Mandaeans don't care about the Sabbath. Like, you know how Christians don't like care about the Sabbath in the same way that Jews do.
That's right.
I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that the Mandaeans also don't keep the Sabbath, which means that the fact that they have their final prophet saying you loosened the Sabbath as a criticism of Jesus, that's not something they would make up. Because they don't keep the Sabbath. So they wouldn't make up this criticism of Jesus. Well, you've messed up the Sabbath. Because they do that too. So wherever this text came from, it wasn't just like invented out of thin air, Because that's not something they would invent. So really interesting text that you can sit and read at home. But yeah, they're a Gnostic sect, so they have this weird cosmology like all of the Gnostics. But I just thought it's worth a mention. These followers of John the Baptist are really cool. But there's a whole series of Gnostic Gospels, and some of them are extremely weird. So like the Gospel of John, the Gospel of Judas, you can imagine this gets discovered in the 1970s. And again, we knew that this existed because Irenaeus wrote about it. So we know that it's pre-180 because he wrote about it in 180. And finally, we discover this text, and we're like, we think this is the Gospel of Judas. So Bart Ehrman is one of the guys who goes to validate this for National Geographic, and they want to give them enough to see, the guy who owns it, they're like, we want to give them enough to verify it, but not so much that they can just read it because they haven't bought it yet. So National Geographic buy it for like $1 million or something. You can probably look. Can you type in Gospel of Judas? It might have been a lot more. Can you type in Gospel of Judas and find like the actual PDF of the text? Because the crazy thing is, right, so they're reading this text, and you can imagine, we know that this is actually, can you go back and go on, yeah, Gnosis or Gospel, something like that will do. Yeah, so this is the actual translation of the thing itself. So it opens underneath the introduction. You can see, this is the secret message of judgment Jesus spoke with Judas Iscariot over a period of 8 days. Can you scroll down?
Yeah, go down. When he appeared on earth, right there.
So check this out, right? So you can imagine, you're a biblical scholar, you know that this Gospel of Judas exists, and then somebody comes to you and says, hey, we've dug up this papyrus. And you know how it opens? It says, this is the message, this is like the secret message that Jesus gave to Judas. And you're like, oh my.
That's like
is this
holy
it?
grail shit.
This is like unbelievable. Yeah. It's like, it's Judas, for those who don't know, is the man who betrays Jesus. He's the man who comes and kisses him on the cheek and betrays him. Why does he betray him? Well, the Christian tradition has it that he is evil. John's gospel says that Satan entered him, and that's why he betrayed Jesus. The synoptics seem to kind of imply that he might have done it for money or for some other reasons. That's a really interesting question too. But this gospel opens. One day he was with his disciples in Judea. He found them sitting, practicing their piety. And his disciples are sitting together praying over the bread. And the word there is the same word for Eucharist. So they're doing the Eucharist. They're praying over their bread. So Jesus comes upon his disciples praying over their bread, and Jesus laughs at them. Jesus doesn't laugh in the canonical Gospels. In the Gospel of Jesus, he laughs 4 times. So they're praying, like saying grace, they're doing the Eucharist, and Jesus laughs at them. And they say, Master, why are you laughing at our prayer? What have we done? Oh, we've done what's right. And he answered them and says, I'm not laughing at you. You're doing this because you want to. Not because you want to, but because through this, your God will be praised.
Your God.
Your God. So Jesus sees them praying over their food, and he starts laughing, and they're like, why are you laughing? He's like, oh, no. You go ahead, you worship your God. Yeah. Well, and it's like, whoa, what is going on here, right? So then they say, but Master, you are the Son of God. And Jesus says to them, how do you know me? Truly I say to you, no generation of people among you will know me. When the disciples heard this, they started to get angry and furious and started to curse them in his heart. And Jesus says to them, why are you letting your anger trouble you? And he says, if any one of you is strong enough among humans to bring out perfect humanity, stand up and face me. So so they're saying, but you're the Son of God. And he's like, you don't know anything. And they're getting angry. And he says, well, if any one of you knows anything, go on, stand up, speak to me. Guess who stands up? Guess who's got the confidence? Judas Iscariot. So Judas stands up. This is, by the way, I'm getting told the story over dinner. When I first hear about the Gospel of Judas, someone says, have you heard of it? I'm like, no, I don't think so. And they're telling me.
How many years ago?
This is, I don't know, a few years ago. It's not actually that long ago. It's probably like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe even less. I'm not sure. But at dinner, and he's like, you know what it says, right? And so he tells me all this. I'm like, this is so interesting. Then this is where I like nearly dropped the knife and fork and just ran home to read it myself, because so Judas actually stands up to him, and he can't quite look him in the eye. He stands before him, and Judas says to Jesus, I know who you are and where you've come from. You've come from the immortal realm of Barbello, and I'm not worthy to utter the name of the one who sent you.
Barbello?
Barbello. It's like, what is going on? This is when the scholars are reading this, and they're like, okay, we know that this is a Gnostic gospel, because Barbello is a name of one of the emanations of God in the Sethian sect of Gnosticism. So there are different kinds of Gnosticism, one of them called Sethianism. Don't want to get too wordy or technical, but
we passed that point 2 hours ago.
But Barbello is recognizably one of these like sort of divine figures within the Gnostic religion, within the Sethian Gnostic faith. So scholars reading this are like, Barbello, dang, it's a Gnostic gospel. So this is a proper Gnostic gospel. And so, yeah, it begins with this remarkable drama where the disciples are praying. Jesus laughs at them, says, you're worshipping your God. So who is their God? And remember what I told you earlier about the Gnostic view that there's the evil material world and the good spiritual world. The evil demiurge is the creator of the material world. So these disciples are praying over their bread, the material stuff. And so Jesus comes in, he's like, you're worshipping your God. You're worshipping the evil demiurge. And that's why he says to them, none of your generation will be worthy of this. Like, you're all getting it totally wrong. And Judas is the one who knows. He stands up and says, I know that you've come from the realm of Barbello. The realm of Barbello is the plethora, the spiritual world.
So the one who is the alleged traitor of him is the one who knows where he comes from, according to this.
Exactly. And so scholars begin reading this, and it's popular to think that this is the gospel that paints Judas as the secret hero. It's not that he's the evil betrayer, he's the secret hero, because he was the one who truly understood where Jesus came from, and so he enacts this plan because he knows what it's all really about. That view then came into it got contested because there's some stuff which
I would imagine
Judas himself in this gospel at points is depicted as someone who himself, he also isn't going to enter into the plethora. He's also not part of the generation that's going to essentially experience salvation, I suppose. Which means although he's the guy that understands it, he's not like the hero of the story. It's kind of complicated, as you can imagine, but you can imagine reading this as a biblical scholar and just being like, oh my goodness, here we have the actual, we've heard about this for so long and now we have it from the horse's mouth. This is incredible. And so yeah, they're praying. Jesus laughs at them, says, you're worshipping your God, which presumably the evil demiurgic God. And then Judas gets up and says, I know where you've come from. You've come from the realm of Barbello. And he's like, yeah, damn right I have. It's like, whoa, what is going on here? So then there's this whole, the rest of the Gospel of Judas, a lot of it is just about Jesus explaining cosmology. So the Gnostic cosmology is insane. There's this ineffable creator being called the invisible spirit. And the invisible spirit, for whatever reason, emanates other beings. So sometimes it's his attributes. So I'd done a whole episode on the Gospel of Judas with Bart Ehrman, one of my favorite episodes, if people are interested, because he's actually an expert in this. And it's emanating different beings. So wisdom is a being. Sophia, the word philosophy means love of wisdom.
I didn't know that.
So philosophia. So philo meaning love, as in phile, you're an Anglophile. You love England, phile, love, philo, love of wisdom, Sophia. So the name Sophia means wisdom. So there's this god in the Gnostic, or emanation of God in the Gnostic cosmology called Sophia, who is wisdom. But yeah, so all of these different emanations. And then for some reason, something goes wrong, and there's this, one of these emanations is kicked out of the plethora. The plethora is the big collection of all of the spiritual beings, right? And this is where, it does start to sound a bit Billy Carson, but I don't think any of this is true. I just this is what the Gnostics believed.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And so you've got some kind of disaster where one of these gods seems to sort of get kicked out of the plethora and tries to recreate the spiritual world, and that's what the material world is. Some traditions say that it was an accident, he was just incompetent, he was trying his best, but was not good enough. Some people say it was evil. I think that the Sethians, I'm not sure about this, but I think that they might believe that, when God says I am the only God, you shall have no other gods before me.
Yes.
That he was mistaken because he'd fallen out of the plethora. And so he creates this material world and mistakenly believes that he's the only God. But he's just the God of the material world because that's all he knows. But he mistakenly says, I am the Lord your God, you'll have no other before me, I'm the big dog, I'm the guy, I'm this is my... And that explains why you have this Old Testament God who creates this material world and then walks around like he owns the place, creating Adam and Eve and then saying, you got to worship me and I'm in charge and you shouldn't worship anybody else. And so who's Jesus? Well, Jesus comes up from the realm of Barbello, which is the plethora. He comes into this material world and basically to tell people, you need to understand that you're trapped in this material world, and through the right knowledge, you can be saved. So that is the cosmology that is at the base of the Gospel of Judas. So Jesus explains this whole cosmology. Just scroll down to a random point, maybe 2/3 of the way down. Scroll a bit further, about there. Okay, so and Adamus was the first cloud of light that no angel could ever see among all those called God. And Adamus beget Seth in the place after the image and likeness of the angel, and he must be made the incorruptible generation of Seth appear to the 12. It's all of this crazy. Then 72 luminaries themselves made 360 luminaries appear in the uncorruptible generation according to the Spirit's will, so that there'd be 5 for each. I'm honestly, man, don't even try to read this. It is just like the most wacky,
It's garble.
crazy,
Yeah.
like. But this is Jesus explaining how the cosmos came into being, how Adam and Eve came into being. And it's the Gnostic version of it, which is like completely different to the Orthodox Christian position, which is why these guys get condemned and why it ends up buried in the desert. If you scroll right to the bottom, we'll see how it ends. Up a bit. Here it is. Immediately there was a disturbance. Okay, so then Judas, so this is the end of the vision. Then Judas looks up at the luminous cloud, which is the plethora, I guess, in his vision, and entered it. Those standing on the ground heard a voice from the cloud saying, some stuff missing, great generation, and Judas didn't see Jesus anymore. There's a lot missing because it spent 16 years in a safety deposit box in New York City. Immediately there was a disturbance among the Jews. Their high priest grumbled because he'd gone into the guest room to pray, but some scribes were watching them closely, blah, 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 blah. And they approached Judas and said to him, "What are you doing here? Aren't you Jesus' disciple?" Then he answered them as they wished. And Judas received some money and he handed him over to them. The Gospel of Judas. And that's where it ends.
So it ends with
with Judas handing over
the
Jesus.
actual story.
So
that we
Jesus
know.
explains the secrets of the cosmos to Judas. And maybe because Judas now understands the mission
He's
and
like, all
gets
right,
it.
get him the fuck out of here.
Yeah, he's like, dude, I can't handle this. Like, but yeah, that's where it ends. And it's kind of eerie because that's where it ends,
Gonna
right?
make him shut up. Take him.
yeah. Give me some money. That's fine. Yeah.
I didn't say kill him.
It's not.
I said
It's
get
not
him the fuck
entirely.
outta here.
It's not entirely clear what's going on there. But it's like it's wacky, right? It's like totally wacky.
It's very.
And so you can imagine Christians looking at this and being like, well, this is obviously nonsense. This is obviously heretical and whatnot. But biblical scholars looking at this and being like, whoa, this is so cool. So the headlines at the time, this is like 2006 or something, like National Geographic is running like the secret gospel that shows Judas is the good guy. Like, oh, we've discovered it. And it's like a huge story. And like, this is like, you know, Dan Brown level, like interest. Cause I think the Da Vinci, I don't know when the Da Vinci Code came out.
2006.
Well,
Okay,
so
not the book. The movie came out in 2006.
Yeah, so it's all like
timed.
it's all like part of the hype. I'm not sure if it was 2006 when it was finally published. It was around then, you know. Like it's just all of this hype, and this is a real one. Like this is actually the Gospel of Judas. It's fascinating. And there's some really wacky stuff. Like, can you open up the Gospel of Thomas? So this is found in the Nag Hammadi library and is probably dated to the 2nd century. Some scholars think that it might be dated earlier than the canonical Gospels, but that's extremely controversial. This is what's known as a sayings gospel.
A sayings gospel.
Sayings gospel. So it just basically contains a bunch of sayings of Jesus, not really any other context. So, for example, and he said, "Whoever discovers the meaning of these sayings won't taste death." And like that's kind of it. That's how it opens. Jesus said, "Whoever seeks shouldn't stop until they find. When they find, they'll be disturbed. When they're disturbed, they'll be amazed and reign over the all." And so it's just like a list of sayings. Some of these are sayings that we also find in the canonical tradition. Some of them are definitely not. So scroll to the very bottom, the last one. Yeah, there's a lot of them. And to be honest, it looks kind of long, but you can read this in like half an hour, and it's just a bunch of sayings. Some of them are absolutely fascinating. This is the most famous one, the very last one. And Simon Peter said to them, "Mary should leave us because women are not worthy of life." Now, what would you expect Jesus to say from what you know of him to this? You'd expect him to say like, "Oh, of course she can inherit eternal life. Just because she's a woman, that doesn't mean that she can't inherit eternal life." Here's what he says in the Gospel of Thomas. "Look, am I to make her a man so that she may..." I don't like this translation, but okay. "Am I to make her a man so that she may become a living spirit too? She's equal to you men because every woman who makes herself manly will enter the kingdom of heaven." That is an incredibly...
Every woman who makes herself manly?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting interpretation. Can you just type in Gospel of Thomas 1:14? Because this is what I would describe as a progressive translation. So... Oh, sorry, wait. No, sorry. Just 114, not 114. Just number 114. And see if we can find the text. So yeah, try it there. Try that. Click on that. Is this the whole Gospel of Thomas? Can you scroll down to 114?
That's long.
That's very long.
So I want to find a more classical translation. There you go. Yeah, okay, so this is how it's more commonly translated. Simon Peter said to them, "Let Mary go away from us because women are not worthy of eternal life." Jesus said, "Look, I will draw her in so as to make her male, so that she may too become a living male spirit similar to you.
I don't like that.
But I say to you, every woman who makes herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven." So this other translation has clearly tried to posit this as like slightly differently. It's tried to reinterpret the words, and I don't know which is correct because I don't read Coptic. People think it was originally written in Greek, by the way, but the version we have from Nag Hammadi is Coptic. And so this is the most famous saying where Jesus says, well, I will make her a male because any woman who makes herself into a man will inherit eternal life. And it's like, what does that mean?
I don't want to know what
it's
that
really
means.
weird. Can you command F for let's say prostitute? Okay, try. Actually, I don't want to throw out a bunch of words. Do son of a. Yeah, check it out. Okay, so
whoever will come to know father and mother, he will be called son of a whore.
Yeah, so,
Jesus said that.
Well, no, he probably didn't because this is a non-canonical.
Yeah.
But there is a tradition.
Sounds very not Jesus.
So again, a bunch of sayings, which like 105. Again, no context, just a sayings gospel. It says, "Whoever will come to know the father and mother, he will be called the son of a whore." Some translations have he will be called the son of a prostitute. And that is like it. That's all you got. The thing is, I read an introduction to a Gospel of Thomas once because this mystified me. I was like, what does this mean? And I read an introduction once which said that the Coptic word for whore or prostitute is extremely similar to either the word for like father or the word for like God or something like that. And so it seems like this, like in the original Greek, it might have been whoever will come to know his father and mother will be called a son of God or something like this. But the Coptic word is very similar, and so there was a little mistake that was made, and that's why we end up with this really strange.
Yeah,
that seems to be the explanation, because otherwise, what on earth could this mean? But it's weird enough that you don't know. So read through all of this, and it's so interesting. Can you control F4 divider, or just like divide?
Divided.
Yeah, and then go up. So we're not in the there. Okay, so check this out. So this is really fun to me when I was reading this. Now this is just my interpretation. Reading through the Gospel of Thomas and all the sayings, one of the things you'll notice is that there's a big emphasis on unity. There's the idea that people have become disparate and they need to be unified, and it's all about unity. You must be unified to each other. Some people, that's their explanation for the woman verse as well. They say that because you ever heard of the Platonic myth of how human beings originally had 4 arms and 4 legs and 2 heads, and they were split in half and spent the rest of their lives trying to search for someone to bring them together. Heard that. So there's this sort of Platonic myth that's the original form of human beings, and that's why we all long to find a partner and come together, because our idyllic form is this 8-limbed being with 2 heads who gets separated, and we have to sort of find the other person so we can come together again, and it's all about unity. And a lot of that like Platonic thought seems to underlie some of at least the Gospel of Thomas. And so there's this emphasis on unity throughout the whole Gospel. And then I was reading this saying here. So a person comes to Jesus and says, "Tell my brothers that they have to divide my father's possession with me." Or might be translated as like, "Tell them how to divide my father's possession with me." Okay. So someone says, my dad's just died. Can you tell me how we should divide up the property? And Jesus says to him, "Man, who has made me a divider?" He turns to his disciples and said to them, "I'm not a divider, am I?"
Like he's asking them?
Or some translations say, "I'm certainly no divider." I was like, well, what could this mean? And I was
the context
this,
is different.
I was like, is he making a joke? I think Jesus is making a joke here, because all of these sayings are about his emphasis on unity. Remember in John 17, "I will be one with you, you'll be one with me." It's all about unity, and it's really important. And he's constantly emphasizing unity. And then someone comes up to him with a trivial question like, "Oh, how should my father divide up my property?" And he says to the man, like, "Who's made me a divider?" Turns to his disciples, "I'm certainly not a divider." Do you know what I mean? Because they know that he's all about unity. So he's like making a joke.
Timing.
So he's like making a joke. He's like, "Well, I'm no," because it's the fact that he says to the man, "Who's made me a divider?" And then he turns to his disciples and goes, "I'm certainly no divider, am I?" Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
I sort of read this as like a joke, because his whole thing's unity, and he's like, "This guy thinks I'm a divided, lads." Isn't that funny? Like it's fascinating, man. And again, I don't know if that's a legitimate interpretation, but they're just a bunch of sayings. It's fascinating. And again, this is something that we know is a genuine, fairly ancient. Well, it is ancient, but it's Christians will argue like, because this is really important. Like, if the Gospel of Thomas is early, if it's like written at the same time as the Gospel of Mark, then you've got a big problem on your hands, because you've got 2 contemporary accounts that say totally different things about
Totally
Jesus.
different, yeah.
So the majority of scholars date it to the mid to late 2nd century. And for Christians, that's enough to say, okay, it's a later document, it's a development, and a lot of it's just like BS. If it is the case that it's dated earlier, it causes a lot of trouble. I have no idea. As I say, dating is very speculative, but there are suggestions either way. So some people think that this has like an Aramaic core of sayings that are legitimately Jesus's and date really early. There's also a hypothesized sayings gospel that we don't have access to. It's called Q. The word for source in German is Quell. So remember how I said that Mark's gospel came first, and then Matthew and Luke both relied heavily on Mark.
Mm-hmm.
So they're quoting Mark all the time. Like almost all of Mark's gospel is also in Matthew and Luke. But Matthew and Luke also have new material that they've written about. Some of that new material is also identical in Matthew and Luke. You hear what I'm saying? So you've got material that's only in Matthew and Luke, but it's the same in Matthew and Luke. So some scholars think that they had this other source that they were drawing from. You know what I mean? So they've got the Gospel of Mark, and they've got this other source that they were drawing from. That source is called Q, because it doesn't have a name. Q for quell, which is just the German word for source. This comes up in German scholarship. Yeah, if you type in like Q source into Google, it should come up. That's right. It refers to a hypothetical lost Greek language collection of Jesus' sayings, also known as the sayings gospel, that Jesus believed was used. So what I mean to say is that some scholars believe in the existence of this document called Q, which is a list of sayings of Jesus. It's another so-called sayings gospel that Matthew and Luke used as a source. We've never found it. We don't know that it exists. We just from textual analysis, people think that it exists, and there's some debate around that. But the interesting thing is it's a sayings gospel. So the materials that Matthew and Luke both share that aren't in Mark are sayings of Jesus. So there is this known, but we know from the Gospel of Thomas that this is the kind of gospel that does exist, just sayings. And so it's kind of interesting how the Gospel of Thomas, if it were early, might be something a bit like Q. And because some of the quotes in the Gospel of Thomas show up in the Synoptic Gospels, or the canonical Gospels, you then raise the question, well, were the Gospel writers using the Gospel of Thomas as a source? Most scholars reject that. They think Thomas is later. But some people like to entertain it as an idea. At the very least, it's incredibly fascinating. All of these Gospels are like absolutely mental. There's an Apocalypse of Peter where Jesus just describes in detail what happens in hell and what happens to individual people.
What does he say?
So it depends on your sin. I think people who've blasphemed will be hung by their tongues on a bit of rope over like the fire. I think
Damn it.
I think women who've had abortions like have to like watch their screaming babies like get boiled alive or something like this. Like it's described in great detail. These texts are absolutely fascinating, man. And there's loads of them. There's just like loads and loads of these different texts, and they all say different wacky, crazy things. But the thing is, a lot of these date much later than the Gospels. Like we're talking possibly hundreds of years afterwards. So.
Which questions the legitimacy of
course,
what they claim.
So you have to bear in mind that a lot of these won't be attached to genuine traditions, but what they do tell us is like they give us insight into what some early Christian communities believed. Like even if you think it's not actually historically connected to Jesus, we know that these are texts that people. This is what people actually thought about Jesus. To the extent Gnosticism was so popular, that there's a church father, I can't remember which one, I never can, who is advising early Christians as they're going out to spread the message of the gospel that when you come onto a new town, don't say to them, "Take me to your Christian church." Say to them, "Take me to your Catholic church." Because Catholic just means universal, like small c Catholic. Because otherwise, they might take you to a Gnostic church. So Gnosticism is so popular that Christian believers are being warned to specify what kind of Christian church they want to be taken to, because it's just so popular that you might end up in a Gnostic church. So Elaine Pagels, who you should really have on the show, although I can't remember where she's based, I don't know if she would come into the studio. She wrote a book in the 70s called The Gnostic Gospels, and it is about looking at the Gnostic Gospels and reframing this idea that the early Christian movement was this unified, like self-corroborating set of Christian doctrines, and there were these texts, and they all basically agreed with each other, and people looked at them, worked it out, set the canon, and that was that. But instead, in the early Christian community, there were all of these different competing views of who Jesus was, all of these different like literatures, all of these different ideas, all of these different cosmologies, and it's all of it is fascinating. I mean,
It's so fascinating.
Demiurge, creator of the universe, evil material. It's so cool, but that's why you also have to resist it, because it has that Dan Brown level of interest. which makes it cool, but also makes you susceptible to this is the Billy
Yes.
Carson effect, I think, is when you hear something like, did you know that like Billy Carson thinks that like Catholic churches were built upon like ancient pyramids or something? It's like totally wacky. But if you hear that, if you're the kind of person that goes like, cool, yeah, all right, I'll run with that. Yeah, that works. That checks out. Then, and that can definitely happen here. So you've got to be careful not to give it too much. But it also means that people are intentionally forging things.
Haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.